never imagined my mother hated me until I read it in her own handwriting. The first line of the diary was like a blade across my chest. If only she had never been born, I could have lived the life I wanted. My breath caught, my vision blurred, and suddenly the world tilted. These weren't the words of a stranger. They were from the woman who raised me, the one who brushed my hair before school and kissed my forehead goodnight. I sat there, frozen, the dusty diary trembling in my hands. The words swam on the page, and I couldn't believe this was real. My chest ached as if every sentence carried the weight of betrayal. This wasn't just a diary. It was a weapon, and my mother had left it behind like a loaded gun, waiting for me to pull the trigger of truth. My name is Clarissa Wynn, and I am 34 years old. Born in the quiet town of Fremont, Ohio, I grew up in a family that looked perfect from the outside. Sunday church, a white picket fence, my mother's homemade pies cooling on the windowsill. But beneath that glossy picture was something brittle, something unsaid, like a photograph left too long in the sun. My father died when I was 15. At least that's what I thought until I read my mother's diary. My mother, Margaret, raised me alone after his death, always painting herself as a grieving widow who sacrificed everything for me. I believed her. I worshipped her resilience. And yet, sitting cross-legged on her bedroom floor after her funeral, I was staring at the raw truth she had hidden in ink. Her secrets didn't just change how I saw her. They changed how I saw myself. The diary had been tucked away in the false bottom of a cedar chest, buried beneath folded quilts and old photographs. I found it while sorting through her belongings, intending to donate most of them to Goodwill. When I pulled it out, the leather was cracked, the pages stiff with age. I thought it would be filled with childhood memories, recipes, maybe her thoughts on life. Instead, the first words ripped through me like lightning. I wanted to slam the cover shut, bury it back under the quilts, and pretend I never saw it. But my curiosity was stronger than my fear. With trembling fingers, I flipped to the next page, bracing myself for more poison. What I found wasn't just venom. It was fire that threatened to burn down everything I knew about my family. On those first pages, she confessed to affairs. Multiple men she claimed she loved more than my father. She wrote about stolen nights in motels, about promises whispered in the dark, about dreams of running away with someone else. My stomach twisted as I read her words, picturing her not as the woman who packed my lunch, but as someone living a double life. She called my father a burden and me an anchor. She wrote about the resentment she carried, how she blamed me for ruining her chance at freedom. My hands shook as I turned each page. I felt like I was trespassing into a forbidden place, one I could never leave once I entered. And the further I read, the more I realized, this wasn't just about her desires. It was about choices that destroyed lives. As I flipped deeper into the diary, I stumbled across entries that didn't just hint at betrayal. They screamed it. One name appeared again and again, Victor. My heart pounded as I read how she described him, the man she claimed she truly loved. He wasn't my father. She wrote of how Victor begged her to leave my father and start over with him. She admitted she wanted to, but said she stayed because of Clarissa. My name carved into the page like a scar. Rage boiled in me. She was saying my existence chained her to a life she despised. Tears blurred my eyes, but I kept reading, each sentence heavier than the last. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. She hinted that Victor might be my real father. I dropped the diary, my chest heaving, my entire body shaking with disbelief. The room suddenly felt smaller, suffocating. I picked up the diary again, desperate to confirm or deny the thought clawing at me. On the next page, she wrote of arguments with my father, screaming matches over bills, over trust, over my resemblance to someone else. I read and reread the lines, my heart screaming for clarity, my head swimming with denial. Could it be true? Had my whole life been built on a lie? I remembered my father's kind eyes, his gentle laugh, the way he carried me on his shoulders at the county fair. Was he even mine? Or was he raising another man's child, a child my mother resented every day? I wanted to throw the diary across the room, set it on fire, erase every word. But I couldn't. I was trapped now, chained to the truth, and there was no turning back. I stumbled to my feet and paced the room, clutching the diary like it might vanish if I let it go. My mother had died 2 weeks ago, leaving me the house, the debts, and the weight of memories. I thought grief was heavy enough. I thought losing her meant losing my anchor. But this was like someone cutting me adrift in a storm. I wanted to scream at her ghost, demand answers she would never give. Every corner of the house felt haunted now, not by love but by lies. I pressed the diary to my chest, shaking, whispering, "Why, Mom? Why would you write this?" And then, in the pit of my stomach, another thought clawed its way up. Maybe she wanted me to find it. Maybe she left it here on purpose. I sat back down on the floor, staring at the diary, torn between closing it forever and reading on. My pulse thudded in my ears. If I kept going, I knew I'd uncover more pain, more betrayal, maybe even darker truths than I could handle. But if I stopped, I'd live in limbo, always wondering what else she hid. My hand hovered over the pages, trembling, as if the ink itself could bite me. And then I thought about Victor. Who was he? Was he still alive? Did he know about me? My mother had written his name with so much passion, so much fire. It was like he was a ghost haunting her life. If he was real, he might still be haunting mine. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to meet him, or destroy him. I closed my eyes, clutching the diary, and made myself a promise. I would read every page, no matter how much it hurt. I would trace every lie back to its root, dig through every secret until I unearthed the full truth. My mother might have taken her last breath, but her words were alive enough to tear me apart. I would not let her betrayal go unanswered. I didn't know what revenge looked like yet, but I knew one thing. I would not rest until I exposed everything. My life might never be the same, but maybe that was the point. Maybe I wasn't meant to live in the shadow of her lies. Maybe I was meant to burn them all down. If you've followed me this far, then you already feel the weight of what I uncovered. My mother's diaries were more than paper and ink. They were a bomb she left behind, and I was the one forced to live in the wreckage. But I'm not going through this alone. I want you with me every step of the way, as I peel back the layers of secrets, betrayal, and revenge. So make sure you subscribe now, because trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. In the next chapter, I'll reveal the diary entry that confirmed my worst fear. The one that made me question not just who my father was, but who my mother truly became. The next morning, I woke up with the diary still clutched in my arms, its leather cover pressed against my cheek like a curse I couldn't shake. The sun poured through my bedroom curtains, but it felt wrong, like the light had no place in a house drowning in shadows. My body was stiff, my mind replaying the words I'd read until they felt branded into me. I wanted to believe it was all some cruel dream, that my mother hadn't written those things, that maybe I had hallucinated the whole night. But when I cracked open the diary again, the ink stared back at me, black and merciless, confirming every wound I had suffered. The words were permanent, and now so was the pain. I knew that once I turned the next page, there was no return to ignorance, no return to the girl I once was. The entry that followed was dated in the summer of 1996, when I was just 5 years old. My mother wrote about a fight she had with my father, describing how he accused her of sneaking out late at night. She admitted casually that she had snuck out, meeting Victor in the parking lot of a closed diner off Route 23. She described the thrill of it, the way her heart raced as if she were alive for the first time in years. She called Victor her salvation, her escape, her only true love. My throat tightened as I read, imagining myself asleep in my bed while my mother was out betraying the man who tucked me in. It wasn't just adultery, it was abandonment. Even when she was physically there, she had already left us in spirit. The idea lodged deep in my chest, making me wonder if I had ever been enough to keep her tethered to us. My father's face flooded my memory. I remembered him as a quiet man, the type who fixed the screen door in silence and rarely raised his voice. But my mother's diary painted him as weak, boring, and suffocating. She mocked his long hours at the factory, his worn-out clothes, his lack of ambition. She wrote about how he never understood her hunger, how he lived like a man content to drown in routine. My fists clenched as I read those lines, because I knew my father had broken his back to provide for us. He didn't buy new clothes because he spent his money on mine. He didn't chase dreams because he was too busy keeping food on the table. My mother had mistaken sacrifice for weakness, and I felt my blood boil at her cruelty. It was like meeting a stranger wearing my mother's face, a woman I never truly knew. Then came the entry that shattered me all over again. My mother admitted that Victor wasn't just a lover. He was the man she wanted to raise me. She confessed that in her darkest nights, she prayed my father would slip up, fall ill or disappear, so she could be free to give Victor the life she believed they deserved. My jaw dropped as I read, bile rising in my throat. She was wishing death on the man who loved her, all for a fantasy. She called me a piece of him that she could never escape, a daily reminder of her prison. My stomach twisted and I slammed the diary shut, my chest heaving with rage. My mother didn't just resent me. She despised the parts of me that came from my father, despised the reflection of a man she wanted erased. I paced the room, my heart pounding like a drum. Every wall seemed to close in, every memory turning sharp and jagged. I remembered birthdays when my mother smiled at me, and now I wondered if those smiles were lies. I remembered her telling me stories about how she and Dad fell in love, and now I knew they were fabrications crafted for a child too innocent to see the cracks. The air in the house grew heavier with every step I took, as if her lies were seeping from the walls. I wanted to scream, to tear the pages apart, but something inside me held back. Destroying the diary would erase her words, but it wouldn't erase the truth. If anything, it would bury me in unanswered questions. And I couldn't afford questions anymore. I needed answers, every last one of them. I forced myself to sit back down and flip to the next entry. This one was written in late autumn of 1999, the year my father died. My stomach turned icy as my eyes scanned the page. She wrote about how things were finally aligning, how she could see freedom on the horizon. She mentioned my father's worsening cough, his stubbornness about seeing a doctor, and her secret satisfaction that fate was stepping in. My heart nearly stopped as I read her chilling words. If he goes, it won't be an accident. It will be destiny giving me back my life. My breath came out ragged, my pulse thundering in my ears. Was she admitting to something? Was she just venting? I didn't know, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Did my mother let my father die? Or worse, did she help it happen? The possibility gnawed at me, clawed at the edges of my sanity. I remembered my father's cough, the way he grew weaker in those final months, the suddenness of it all. Everyone said it was pneumonia that took him, but now I questioned everything. Did she ignore his pleas for help? Did she withhold medicine? My hands trembled so hard I almost dropped the diary. I felt my childhood collapsing under me like a house of cards, every memory tainted with suspicion. If my mother had been capable of betrayal, of resenting me so deeply, then maybe she was capable of far worse. The diary wasn't just revealing her secrets, it was reshaping my entire life. And the more I read, the more I realized I might not want to know where the truth would lead. But I couldn't stop. I had already stepped into the darkness, and stopping now would mean living half blind. I needed to know if Victor was truly my father. I needed to know what role my mother played in my father's death. Most of all, I needed to know why she left this behind for me to find. My chest ached as I turned the page, the ink blurring from the tears in my eyes. The next entry began with one sentence that froze me in place. One day, Clarissa will understand the truth, and she will hate me for it. My breath caught in my throat as I read it again and again, the words searing into me. It was almost like she was speaking across time, directly to me, daring me to keep going. And in that moment I knew, my mother's story was far from over. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house felt like a whisper, every shadow stretched long with suspicion. The sentence I'd read in my mother's diary, "One day, Clarissa will understand the truth, and she will hate me for it," clung to my ribs like a splinter I couldn't dig out. I sat cross-legged on my bed, the diary open on my lap, my eyes tracing the curves of her handwriting as though they could reveal something beyond the words. My heart was raw like an open wound, and I knew I couldn't carry this weight alone much longer. But who could I trust with something so poisonous? If my mother's secrets were real, they didn't just belong to her anymore. They belonged to me. And the responsibility of holding them felt like fire in my hands. I needed answers, but I also needed someone who wouldn't run. The next entry was from February 2000, a month after my father's funeral. My chest tightened as I read her words, every line steeped in twisted relief. She wrote about how free she finally felt, how the air in the house no longer suffocated her, how Victor had come back into her life like sunlight after a storm. She described his hands, his voice, the way he made her laugh as if she were 16 again. My hands shook, and I slammed the diary shut. I couldn't read anymore. It was too much. Her joy felt like a slap to my father's memory, an erasure of everything he sacrificed. My fists balled, tears burning my eyes, because while I had been crying myself to sleep in the weeks after Dad's death, she had been celebrating. She had been with him. Victor. And it made me wonder if I had ever truly known the woman who raised me. I thought back to those weeks after my father's death. I remembered my mother wearing black, her face tight with grief in public. People brought casseroles, whispered condolences, and patted her on the back like she was some tragic widow. But in the privacy of her diary, she was rejoicing. She was free. The duality made me sick, made me question every tear I saw on her face back then. Were they crocodile tears? A performance for the world? I remembered clinging to her side, seeking comfort, believing she was hurting just like me. But now it seemed I had been grieving alone. She was already gone, already slipping into someone else's arms, while I was left clutching the ashes of a father who deserved better. My chest ached as I realized I had been a fool, a child blind to the stage my mother had set. Then came a detail that froze my blood. She mentioned that Victor had visited the house after Dad's death, sneaking in late at night when she thought I was asleep. My heart thudded because I remembered those nights. I remembered hearing footsteps downstairs, creaks on the floorboards that I thought were ghosts of my imagination. But now I knew they weren't ghosts. They were him. Victor. A man who wasn't supposed to exist in my world, a stranger who had walked the same floors I played on, a shadow in my childhood home. The idea made my skin crawl, like I had been living in a house haunted not by spirits, but by secrets. And worse still, my mother hadn't cared that I might see. She had paraded him into our lives, hidden in the dark, as if I didn't matter. As if my father's memory didn't matter. I tried to picture Victor, but all I had were fragments. A name, a vague outline from my mother's descriptions. He became a phantom in my mind, tall and faceless, looming in the corners of my childhood. I wondered if I had ever passed him in town, if he had ever seen me and smiled with some twisted pride, knowing who I really was. The thought made my skin prickle. If he truly was my biological father, then he had abandoned me for decades, letting me live in the shadow of lies. And if he wasn't, then he had been nothing more than a thief, stealing my mother's loyalty, stealing her attention, and stealing the peace of a family that could have been whole. Either way, his presence was poison. And suddenly, I knew what I had to do. I had to find him. I had to look Victor in the eye. The thought terrified me, but it also filled me with a strange power. For too long, I had lived as a bystander to my own life, accepting the stories others fed me. But now I had a weapon, the diary. It was proof of my mother's betrayal, evidence of the shadows that had shaped my life. If Victor was alive, he held answers my mother never gave me. And if he wasn't alive, then I needed to know what kind of man he had been, what kind of man she had thrown everything away for. My pulse quickened with the possibility. For the first time, the grief and rage inside me had a direction, a path to follow. And though the road ahead was dark, I knew I couldn't stop now. My mother's lies had ruled my past, but I would not let them control my future. The next morning I found myself sitting at the town library, the diary hidden in my bag like contraband. My hands trembled as I typed Victor Matthews Route 23 Diner into the computer's search bar. The results came back sparse, but one name kept surfacing. A Victor Matthews who had lived in Ridgefield, a small town less than an hour away. He was older now, mid-60s, according to a faded article about a construction company he once owned. My heart hammered as I read the words, because this was him. Had to be. The same Victor my mother had painted as her salvation. My palms grew sweaty, and I sat back in the chair, staring at the screen. He was real. Flesh and blood. And maybe just a phone call away. But as I sat there, paralyzed, a new thought slithered in. What if he already knew about me? Possibility shook me. If Victor knew I existed, if he had always known, then his silence was louder than any denial. Meant he chose absence. It meant he had left me to be raised by a man my mother despised, all while hiding in the shadows. I clenched my jaw, fury rising like a tide, because if that was true, then he didn't just betray my father. He betrayed me. My hands hovered over the keyboard, debating whether to search for a phone number, an address, anything. But before I could move, a sound behind me made my heart jump. A voice, deep and low, said my name. Clarissa. I spun around, my pulse surging, and my eyes locked onto a stranger standing in the library aisle. His face was unfamiliar, yet his eyes looked hauntingly familiar. And in that moment I knew. My search for Victor had already begun. The moment I turned and saw the man standing there, the air in the library thickened, pressing against my lungs. His voice had called my name, but I had no memory of him. His face was unfamiliar, weathered like stone left too long in the sun, but his eyes, they burned into me. They were the same hazel green that stared back at me every morning in the mirror. My mouth went dry. I whispered, "Do I know you?" And for a long second he didn't answer. He just looked at me, his lips twitching like he was fighting back a storm. Then he gave a small smile, the kind that wasn't kind at all, and said, "You remind me of someone." My stomach dropped because deep inside I knew. This wasn't a stranger. This was Victor. And the truth was finally standing 3 feet away from me. I froze in my chair, my fingers clenching the edge of the desk like it could anchor me. A million questions stormed through my head, but none of them made it to my tongue. Victor's presence was suffocating, yet oddly magnetic. I studied his face, the faint scar across his jawline, the heavy lines carved by time and regret. He looked older than the man my mother described in her diaries, but the echoes of her words clung to him like shadows. My heart thudded as I asked, "Why are you here?" He leaned against the bookshelf, folding his arms casually, like this was some ordinary reunion. His smile thinned. "Because I knew you'd come looking. And because there are things you don't understand yet." His words cut deeper than he could know. He was here because of her. Because of the diaries. Because of secrets I had only begun to uncover. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, to tear every truth from his lips. But instead I sat there trembling, trapped between rage and fear. "Did you know about me?" I finally spat, my voice cracking under the weight of years. His eyes darkened, and he didn't answer right away. He glanced around the library like the walls themselves might eavesdrop. Then he leaned closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Of course I knew. I knew from the beginning." My chest caved in, air rushing out of me. My worst fear had just been confirmed. He wasn't ignorant. He wasn't some man hidden in the shadows by my mother's choices. He was complicit. He had chosen silence. He had chosen to watch my life unravel from a distance, knowing he could step in and never doing it. And that truth broke something inside me that would never heal again. "You knew," I repeated, the words trembling as they left my mouth. My voice cracked, echoing in the quiet library. He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "Your mother begged me to stay away. She said it was better for you if I didn't interfere. She wanted to protect you from the kind of man I am." His tone carried no shame, no apology, just bluntness like he was stating the weather. My nails dug into my palms, my entire body shaking. Protect me. By letting me grow up with lies. By forcing me to grieve a father who may not even have been mine. My stomach turned. You don't get to justify abandonment, I hissed. But he only sighed like my anger was a predictable script he had read before. That sigh infuriated me more than any confession. It was the sigh of a man who had excused himself 1,000 times already. The room tilted, my head swimming as the world I knew crumbled. All I could see was my mother's handwriting, her diary pages screaming betrayal, now confirmed by the man standing before me. The weight of their choices pressed into my chest until I could barely breathe. And then Victor said something that shattered me further. Your father knew, Clarissa. My head snapped up, my eyes narrowing. What? He nodded, his voice calm. He knew I was in her life. He knew about us. He knew there was a chance you weren't his by blood. My entire body stiffened, the words slamming into me like a freight train. My father, my protector, my hero, had known. He had carried this knowledge in silence, raising me anyway, letting me believe I was his daughter. The revelation twisted my grief into something unrecognizable. It wasn't just betrayal. It was pity. My father had pitied me. I felt sick, like my stomach was trying to claw its way out of me. My father had known, and still he never told me. Never looked me in the eye and said the words that could have broken the illusion sooner. Instead he let me live a lie. My chest burned as anger roared inside me. All these years I had idolized him for his strength, his quiet devotion. But now I wondered if it wasn't devotion at all, if it was cowardice. Maybe he couldn't bear the confrontation. Maybe he thought love could mask the truth. But love without honesty was just another form of betrayal. And betrayal was all I seemed to inherit from this family. My throat burned as tears slid down my cheeks, but I refused to let Victor see me break. I wiped them away with the back of my hand and forced myself to look at him again. What do you want from me? I demanded, my voice sharp. Victor leaned back, crossing his arms again, as though this conversation were a negotiation instead of an unraveling of my soul. I want you to know the truth. All of it. And then I want you to decide what to do with it. My fists clenched. And what if I decide to hate you both forever? His lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. Then at least you'll hate me for the truth, not the lie. His words dug under my skin, and I hated that they carried a strange kind of logic. But the truth wasn't liberating, it was toxic. It was rotting me from the inside out. And yet a part of me craved more. Craved the full story no matter how much it bled. Because until I knew everything I couldn't move forward. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. His handwriting scrawled across it. An address. My hands hovered over it, trembling. She wrote about me in her diaries, didn't she? He asked quietly. My breath caught because the way he said it told me he already knew. I nodded, unable to speak. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Then you've seen only half the story. The rest isn't in there. She never put it on paper. My pulse quickened as my eyes darted to the address. What else was there? What could possibly be worse than what I already knew? My chest tightened as I realized I was standing at the edge of a cliff, and Victor was pushing me closer. If you want the truth, come here, he said softly. His gaze locked onto mine, sharp and unyielding. But once you do, nothing in your life will ever be the same. The library around us buzzed faintly, the low hum of computers, the soft whispers of turning pages. But in that moment, the world narrowed to just Victor and me, two people tethered by a truth too heavy to carry. My hands shook as I picked up the piece of paper, folding it into my pocket like a dangerous weapon. My voice came out ragged, barely a whisper. If I come, what will I find? Victor's lips parted as if to answer, but he closed them again, his expression unreadable. He leaned back, pushing himself away from the desk, his final words lingering like smoke in the air. You'll find out what your mother never wanted you to know. And with that, he turned and walked out of the library, leaving me trembling in my chair. My pulse thundered as I realized I had a choice: burn the address or chase the darkness that had already consumed me. The piece of paper felt like it was burning through my pocket as I walked out of the library. Every step I took felt heavier, like the weight of the truth was pressing down on my shoulders, daring me to crumble. I could have thrown the address away, pretended Victor never existed, buried myself in the comfort of ignorance. But I knew that wasn't possible anymore. Once you open the door to secrets, you can't close it again. I walked through the parking lot in a haze, my heart pounding as if it were trying to run ahead of me. The address whispered from inside my pocket, a siren's call I couldn't resist. I told myself I'd wait a day, maybe a week. But the lie dissolved the moment I slid into my car. I knew I was going to that address tonight, no matter the cost. The drive was suffocating. My hands clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, my eyes darting to the folded paper on the passenger seat as though it might leap up and bite me. The road stretched endlessly ahead, lined with trees and empty fields that blurred in the fading light. My mind replayed every word Victor had said, every scar etched into his face, every unsettling truth he had dropped like stones into my chest. "Your father knew." That sentence repeated like a drumbeat in my skull. How could Dad have known and stayed silent? Did he think he was protecting me, or protecting himself from confrontation? The betrayal stung more deeply with every mile. My chest tightened, and I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My own hazel green eyes stared back at me, the same as Victor's, proof I couldn't escape. Proof that blood, no matter how poisonous, leaves its mark. By the time I reached the outskirts of Ridgefield, the sky had deepened to a dusky purple, stars pressing faintly against the dark canvas of night. My stomach churned as I turned down the narrow road listed on the paper. It was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin itch. The houses here were older, sagging under years of weather and neglect, their paint peeling like old wounds. Finally, I pulled up to the address scribbled in Victor's handwriting. It was a single-story house with a crooked porch and shutters hanging by loose nails. The front yard was littered with broken furniture, rusted bicycles, and weeds tall enough to swallow a child. My pulse quickened as I stared at the house, half expecting Victor to appear in the window, watching me. But the windows were dark, the house silent. For a moment, I wondered if this was all some kind of trap. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under my shoes echoing far too loudly in the still night. My breath puffed in front of me, though it wasn't cold, and goosebumps prickled my arms. Each step toward the porch felt heavier, like the air itself resisted me. My heart thundered as I reached the door, the wood warped and splintered with age. I raised my fist, hesitated, then knocked. The sound echoed hollowly like knocking on a coffin. For a long, suffocating moment nothing happened. Then a creak echoed from inside. The door opened an inch, revealing a woman's face. She was older, her skin weathered, her hair a tangled mess of gray. Her eyes were sharp though piercing, the kind that cut right through you. "You must be Clarissa," she said, her voice low and steady. My blood ran cold. Whoever this woman was, she already knew my name. Froze my mouth dry. "How do you know me?" I asked, my voice trembling. The woman's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Victor told me you'd come. He told me you'd need to know." She stepped back, the door creaking wider, and gestured for me to enter. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but curiosity was stronger. I stepped inside, my breath catching as I took in the dimly lit room. The air was thick with dust and the faint metallic tang of rust. The furniture was old and sagging, the wallpaper peeling in strips. But what drew my attention was the stack of boxes in the corner, each labeled with dates, some going back decades. My pulse raced. Diaries, letters, evidence. Whatever secrets my mother had hidden, whatever Victor hadn't told me, they were here. And I was about to plunge headfirst into them, whether I was ready or not. The woman moved slowly, like her bones ached, but her eyes never left me. "I'm Evelyn," she said softly. Victor's sister. My breath caught. His sister. I had never even considered Victor might have family nearby. Why am I here? Asked, my voice tight. Evelyn's expression softened, though there was sadness behind her eyes. Because your mother wasn't the only one keeping secrets. Victor wanted you to know the truth, but not from him. From me. She gestured toward the boxes, her hand trembling slightly. Those aren't just your mother's words. They're his too. Letters. Plans. My chest tightened as I walked toward the boxes, my fingers brushing over the yellowed cardboard. I pulled open the top, my heart in my throat. Inside were envelopes, hundreds of them, bound with string. My mother's handwriting covered some. But others were in Victor's hand. And that's when the real nightmare began. The first letter I picked up was dated 1995, 5 years before my father's death. My hand shook as I unfolded it, my eyes scanning the words. It was from my mother to Victor, and the words made my stomach twist. She wrote about how suffocating her marriage felt, how she longed for a life with him, how every moment with my father felt like a performance. My breath hitched as I read the line that cut deepest. Sometimes I wonder if Clarissa would be better off if he were gone. My knees nearly buckled, and I dropped the letter as though it had burned me. Evelyn's gaze was heavy on me, but she didn't speak. My mind spun. My mother hadn't just betrayed my father emotionally. She had wished him gone. She had thought about a life where he didn't exist. My chest heaved, rage and sorrow colliding in my veins. I forced myself to grab another letter, desperate, terrified, needing to know more. This one was written by Victor, his handwriting jagged and dark. He spoke of plans, whispered promises, and the future they would build once the obstacle was gone. The word burned into me. Obstacle. My father, my entire childhood, reduced to a roadblock in their love story. My stomach churned as bile rose in my throat. Had they been planning his death? Was his heart attack not as natural as I had believed all these years? The thought clawed at my chest, ripping apart every memory I had of that night. My father clutching his chest, collapsing to the floor. My mother's screams. Paramedics. The funeral. Was all of it staged? My vision blurred as tears burned hot, my body shaking uncontrollably. Evelyn placed a trembling hand on my shoulder. There's more, Clarissa. Much more. But you have to be ready for it. Her words settled over me like a curse. More. How much more could there possibly be? My world was already unraveling, every truth I thought I knew dissolving into lies. And yet, a dark, dangerous hunger stirred inside me. If my mother and Victor had been involved in something more sinister than betrayal, then I had to know. I had to uncover every hidden word, every secret letter, every poisonous truth they left behind. Because only then could I decide what to do. Only then could I take back control of the life they had stolen from me. My jaw tightened as I reached for another box, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. Show me everything, I whispered, my voice trembling but resolute. Evelyn's eyes glistened with sorrow, but she nodded. Then prepare yourself, Clarissa. Because once you see the rest, there will be no turning back. I thought knowledge would free me, but instead it chained me tighter than ever before. Each night I closed my eyes, my mother's words came alive in my head. Whispers of her affairs, her cruel confessions, her contempt for the people who trusted her. I kept hearing her describe my father as a fool with no spine, and it made me furious. My father, who worked himself into the grave to give us a decent life, reduced to nothing but ridicule in her private writings. Anger made my hands shake, and fear made me silent. I carried the secret like a boulder on my back, pretending everything was fine during the day but drowning in torment when the house was quiet. I wondered if knowing her truth would destroy me before I ever found the courage to face her, or worse, to tell my father's memory that I finally knew. I began avoiding mirrors because I couldn't stand to see her reflection in me. Every woman says she fears becoming her mother, but for me it was no longer a joke or cliché. It was a nightmare creeping closer each day. I saw her sharp cheekbones in my own face, her calculating stare in my tired eyes. I wanted to scrape away everything she left behind, but no amount of makeup, no change of hairstyle, could erase the blood I carried. I hated myself for being her daughter, hated the inevitability of carrying pieces of her cruelty inside me. I tried to distract myself with long walks, with meaningless conversations with neighbors, but nothing silenced the truth that my mother's legacy was now mine to endure. She had planted her poison, and I was terrified it would bloom in me. One night, unable to sleep, I drove to the edge of town, where an old steel bridge stretched over the river. I parked my car and walked to the middle, letting the wind whip my hair and sting my cheeks. I thought about throwing the diaries into the water, about watching her words sink into darkness and vanish forever. The thought gave me a small taste of relief, like breathing after drowning. But then another voice whispered in my mind, if I destroyed the diaries, her sins would go unpunished. Her lies would remain hidden, her legacy untarnished. I stood there for hours, clutching them to my chest, torn between burying the past and exposing it for the world to see. The bridge became my sanctuary, the only place where I could scream without being heard. Each night I returned, shouting her words into the wind, cursing her name, begging for answers I'd never receive. I imagined my father standing there beside me, shaking his head, warning me not to become consumed by vengeance. But wasn't I already consumed? Every thought, every breath, every heartbeat was tied to her betrayal. My friends noticed my sudden absences, the dark circles under my eyes, the hollow tone in my laugh. I lied to them, saying I was working through stress, but in truth I was unraveling. The box had opened, and I didn't know how to close it again. One evening, while pacing the kitchen with the diaries spread across the counter, I noticed something new. At the very back of one journal, in handwriting more rushed and uneven than the rest, was an entry I had overlooked. The words chilled me to the bone. If anyone ever finds this, know that I had no choice. What I did was survival. And if my daughter ever reads this, remember, you're more like me than you think. I dropped the book as though it had burned me. The pages fluttered open on the floor, taunting me. My stomach twisted. Survival. What had she done in the name of survival? What had she condemned me to inherit? The next morning, I drove out to the old nursing home where she lived. I had been avoiding her since uncovering the truth, but now I needed answers. My hands trembled as I pushed through the automatic doors, greeted by the sterile scent of bleach and the muffled hum of televisions in residents' rooms. A nurse smiled kindly at me, asked if I was here to see Mrs. Holloway. I nodded, my throat dry. As I walked down the hallway, each step felt heavier, as if the building itself wanted to drag me back. When I reached her door, I froze, staring at her name printed neatly on the plaque. She was inside, breathing, waiting, and yet she had no idea that I knew the monster she had been in secret. When I finally stepped inside, she looked up from her chair, her eyes sharp despite her frail body. "Well, look who decided to visit," she said, her voice like gravel wrapped in silk. I stood frozen in the doorway, clutching the diary to my chest, my heart pounding. She didn't know I had read it yet. She didn't know the war raging inside me. For a moment, I thought about turning around and leaving, retreating into silence forever. But something inside me snapped. I stepped forward and placed the diary on her lap. Her eyes flickered down, then back up to me, narrowing. She knew immediately. The silence between us was suffocating, thick with everything unspoken. My hands balled into fists and I whispered, "Why, Mom? Why would you write this? Why would you live like this?" Her lips curled into a faint smile, and for the first time, I saw her not as a mother, but as a woman stripped of illusions. "Because the world doesn't reward good women," she said flatly. "It never did. You think your father was a saint. He was weak. Weak men get trampled and strong women survive. I did what I had to. And so will you." Her words were like acid poured into my ears. I wanted to scream that she was wrong, that I would never be like her. But deep down a sliver of doubt pierced me. Was she right? Was survival only possible through cruelty, through betrayal. I left the nursing home shaking, her words echoing in my skull. Driving home, I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My whole life, I had been told stories of love, of sacrifice, of marriage built on trust. Now, my own mother stood as living proof that those stories were illusions. And worse, she believed I was destined to follow her path. I didn't want her legacy, but how could I escape it? The road blurred before me as tears filled my eyes, and for a moment, I considered swerving off the highway, ending the torment in an instant. But something inside me, some fragile thread of hope, held me back. I couldn't let her win. I couldn't let her prediction become my truth. That night, I spread the diaries across my floor again, reading every page with renewed intensity. If she believed her actions were survival, then I needed to know what exactly she had done. I needed to trace the threads of her lies, her betrayals, her cruelty, until I found the truth that lay beneath. Only then could I decide whether to bury her legacy, or burn it in the open for all to see. As the hours passed and dawn crept in, I realized something terrifying. Her words were no longer just haunting me, they were guiding me. She had set the stage, and I was already stepping into her shadow. When I woke the next morning, the decision had already been made inside me, though I hadn't spoken it aloud. Revenge was no longer an idea floating in the back of my mind. It was a pulse in my veins, steady and undeniable. My mother's smirk, her cruel words about my father, her warning that I would become like her, burned hotter than any flame. I couldn't live in her shadow anymore. If she believed survival demanded cruelty, then maybe I would show her what cruelty really looked like. But my revenge wouldn't be wild or impulsive. It would be deliberate, surgical, the kind of justice that would strip her of the power she clung to even in that nursing home chair. She had built her life on secrets, and secrets were the perfect weapon to turn against her. I just needed the courage to wield them. I began small, collecting every piece of her writing, every diary entry, and scanning them into my computer late at night when the world slept. I knew these weren't just private ramblings. They were confessions, proof of a double life that would shatter the careful image she had maintained. My hands shook as I uploaded the files, imagining the day I would release them, exposing her to the world. But revenge wasn't just about exposure. It had to cut deeper, closer to the bone. She needed to feel the same humiliation she had inflicted on my father, the same betrayal she forced me to inherit. For weeks, I researched how to trace her past, looking for names she mentioned in those diaries. Lovers, accomplices, even enemies. Each name became a thread in a web I was weaving, one that would eventually strangle her illusions. One night, while combing through her oldest diary, I found a clue I had missed before. A bank account number, written carelessly in the margins. My heart raced. It wasn't my father's account, and it wasn't mine. Could it be evidence of hidden money? I followed the trail, calling in favors from a friend who worked in finance. Days later, she whispered into the phone, "Your mom has money stashed in an account under another name. A lot of money." I felt my breath catch. All those years of pretending we were scraping by, of watching my father die exhausted from endless shifts, while she siphoned money into secret reserves. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. And suddenly, I had leverage, the kind of weapon that could pierce even her hardened shell. I visited her again at the nursing home, but this time I didn't bring the diaries. Instead, I carried a folder filled with printed bank statements, proof of her hidden fortune. When I laid them in her lap, her eyes went wide for the first time. For a brief moment, I saw fear flicker across her face, and it thrilled me. "You've been hiding this," I whispered, my voice calm but razor-sharp. "While Dad killed himself working, you were hoarding money for yourself. Tell me, Mom, who was it for?" "You. One of your lovers." She didn't answer. She pressed her lips tight, her silence an admission of guilt. That was the moment I knew. I had her cornered. And once a predator feels cornered, that's when the hunt really begins. The idea of revenge stopped being a fantasy and started becoming a plan. I mapped out every possible move, scribbling notes in a journal of my own, the blueprint of vengeance. I would expose her secret accounts to the authorities, ensuring her hidden money was frozen. I would leak pages of her diaries, carefully selected, to her old friends from church and the community she had fooled for decades. I wanted her name whispered in disgust, her reputation shredded until there was nothing left. And most of all, I wanted her to feel powerless, to understand what it was like to live under the crushing weight of secrets she could no longer control. Every page I wrote made my heart pound faster, not with fear this time, but with purpose. But as the plan grew, so did the doubt. Late at night when the house was quiet, I'd hear her voice in my head again. "You're more like me than you think." Was I proving her right? Was my thirst for revenge just another form of her cruelty, passed down like a curse? I stared at my reflection, searching for answers. But then I remembered my father's worn face. His hands cracked from labor. The way he looked at me with love even when he had nothing left to give. He deserved justice, and I was the only one left to give it to him. No, this wasn't about becoming her. This was about ending her. My revenge wasn't her legacy. It was my rebellion against it. The first move came sooner than I expected. I called a lawyer, posing as an anonymous informant, and sent over copies of her bank statements. "This is evidence of hidden assets," I told him, disguising my voice. He promised to investigate, and I felt a thrill of satisfaction knowing the walls around her secret fortune were closing in. Next, I drafted letters, attaching carefully chosen excerpts from her diaries. I slipped them into envelopes addressed to old neighbors, her bridge club, even the pastor she once pretended to adore. I didn't send them yet, but holding them in my hand gave me a sense of power I had never known. For once, I wasn't the helpless daughter. I was the executioner, and her reputation was the guillotine's blade. The hardest part was waiting. Each day I visited her at the nursing home, watching her with a mask of innocence, pretending I was just another dutiful daughter. She would chat idly about the nurses, about the weather, never suspecting the storm I was about to unleash. I studied her carefully, searching for cracks in her armor, savoring the knowledge that soon, those cracks would split wide open. Sometimes she would catch me staring, and she'd tilt her head suspiciously, but she never asked. It was almost poetic, the woman who had built her life on suspicion and betrayal now too blind to see her own downfall circling closer every day. One evening as I left her room, I overheard two nurses whispering about her. "She's sharp, that one said. "Scares me a little, honestly." The other laughed. "She acts like she still runs the world." My stomach tightened. They had no idea that I was already dismantling her world piece by piece. The thought should have satisfied me, but instead it left me restless. Revenge was like fire. It burned bright, but it demanded fuel. And once it started, there was no stopping it until everything, even me, was consumed. As I drove home that night, I realized I was already too deep to turn back. My revenge was no longer a plan. It was destiny. I sat at my desk, staring at the letters, the evidence, the blueprint spread out before me. Tomorrow, I would make my first public move, the one that would send her carefully guarded life crashing down around her. I felt both exhilarated and terrified, my body trembling with anticipation. For years, she had controlled the narrative, hidden behind her lies, her secrets, her venom. But tomorrow the truth would belong to me. As the clock ticked past midnight, I whispered to the empty room, "This ends now, Mom." And yet, deep down, a small voice whispered back, a chilling reminder. Once I pulled the trigger, there would be no undoing what I had set in motion. The morning the letters went out, I felt both like a warrior and a criminal. I had licked each envelope, sealed it with trembling hands, and dropped them into the mailbox with a finality that left me breathless. Inside each one were her words. Not mine, not rumors, but her own confessions of betrayal, her pride in humiliating my father, her delight in her secret lovers. By noon, the storm had begun to form. My phone buzzed with texts from old neighbors. "Is this true? How could she write something like this? I don't believe it." I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I sat by the window, sipping coffee as if nothing had changed. But everything had. By sundown, my mother's carefully crafted reputation was no longer golden. It was blood-stained, shredded, and hanging by a thread for the whole world to see. 2 days later, I walked into the nursing home and noticed the difference immediately. The nurses didn't smile at her anymore. Some avoided her room altogether. I overheard whispers in the hallway. Her name carried in low, scandalous tones. When I entered her room, she was sitting upright in her chair, her lips pressed tight, her eyes flashing with suspicion. "What did you do?" she asked before I even sat down. I forced a mask of innocence, tilting my head. "What do you mean?" But she wasn't fooled. "Don't play games with me, Celine. The vultures are circling, and I can smell your hand in it." Hearing my name in her sharp tone used to cut me down. This time it fueled me. I leaned closer and whispered, "Maybe the vultures are just hungry for the truth." Her face twisted, and for the first time I saw her confidence crack. The next wave hit harder. A local pastor she once adored called her out during a Sunday sermon, his voice trembling with rage. "We all sin," he said, "but to take pride in sin is to mock God himself." Word spread quickly. People who once sought her approval now crossed the street to avoid her. The bridge club she lorded over voted to remove her name from its roster. Her empire of respect collapsed in days, not years. And though I had orchestrated it, even I was shocked at the speed. When I visited her again, she hurled a cup of water at the wall and screamed, "You've destroyed me." I stood there, calm and steady. "No, Mum. You destroyed yourself. I just gave your words the audience they deserved." It was the truth, and it broke her. She slumped back into her chair, her hands shaking, her breathing ragged, as if the air itself had turned against her. But revenge is never satisfied with one blow. I knew the bank account was the next card to play, and the timing was perfect. Within a week, I received confirmation from the lawyer I had tipped off. The IRS had frozen her hidden account. The money she'd hoarded for decades was now untouchable, locked away from her greedy hands. When I told her, her face went pale, her composure finally shattering. "That money was mine," she whispered, her voice trembling. I shook my head. "It was Dad's sweat. It was my childhood. It was everything you stole while we lived in scraps. And now it's gone, just like your reputation." She screamed then, a raw, guttural sound that shook the walls, and the nurses rushed in to calm her. I turned and walked out, my steps steady, my heart thundering with satisfaction. For once I had the power. Still the victory felt strange. At night I lay awake, hearing her screams echo in my mind. I had dreamed of this moment for so long, and yet the triumph was heavy. Was I becoming her? The fear crawled at me like a shadow, whispering that vengeance was eating me alive. But each time the doubt grew, I remembered my father's tired eyes. His sacrifices that were never enough, the way he carried his love for me quietly while she destroyed him. My revenge wasn't cruelty, it was justice. And justice often came with blood on your hands. I told myself that again and again, until the whisper of guilt dulled into silence. And when I finally closed my eyes, I dreamed not of her anger, but of my father's weary smile. His spirit finally freed from her chains. That was enough to steady me. The community turned colder with every passing day. By the third week, the nursing home administrator requested a meeting with me. "Your mother's behavior has become disruptive," she said carefully. "The staff is uncomfortable. Families have complained." I almost laughed at the irony. For years, my mother thrived on making others uncomfortable, relishing the control it gave her. Now, stripped bare, she was just another bitter old woman no one wanted to be near. "We may need to transfer her," the administrator added. I nodded slowly, masking the satisfaction in my chest. "Do what you must." She made her choices. The administrator sighed, her pity directed not at my mother but at me, as if she thought I was suffering too. She couldn't know the truth. I wasn't suffering. For the first time in years I was breathing freely, watching the Queen's crown tumble into the dirt. The hardest confrontation came one evening, when I found her alone in her room, staring at the wall. She looked smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched, her hair unkempt, her eyes tired. "Why, Celine?" she asked quietly, her voice stripped of venom. "Why would you do this to your own mother?" For a moment I hesitated, my chest tightening. Then I stepped closer and said, "Because you weren't a mother to me. You were a tyrant. You destroyed Dad, you tried to destroy me, and you thought your secrets would protect you. But secrets rot, Mom. And now so do you." She didn't answer. She turned her face away, and I knew then that I had won. Not just the battle but the war. The silence was her surrender. The final crack in a woman who had built her world on lies. Word of her downfall spread beyond our small town. A cousin from another state called me in shock, asking if it was true. "All those years I thought she was this perfect woman," she said, her voice breaking. "But she was a monster. I didn't correct her. I didn't need to. Let the world see her as I had always seen her. My revenge had given me something I thought I'd never have again. Control over the story. No longer was I the scared little girl trapped under her shadow. I was the one writing the narrative page by page, just as she once did in those diaries. The difference was mine wasn't fiction. It was truth. And truth, I realized, was the sharpest blade of all. Yet even in victory there was unease. One night, as I reread her diaries, I stumbled on an entry I hadn't noticed before. It was dated years before I was born. The handwriting was shaky, frantic, different from her usual sharp strokes. In it she mentioned someone, by a name I didn't recognize. My pulse quickened as I traced the words, realizing this wasn't about affairs or money. This was something deeper, darker. A secret so carefully buried she hadn't dared revisit it in decades. And as I stared at the page, a chill spread through me. Maybe my revenge wasn't over. Maybe I hadn't uncovered everything yet. And the thought terrified me more than anything else. I stared at the diary entry until the words blurred, my breath shallow as if the ink itself was poisonous. The page was filled with frantic writing, more desperate than any confession I had seen before. My mother mentioned a name, Nathaniel Crowe. I had never heard it spoken in our family, never seen it in any photo album, never whispered at reunions. Yet the way she wrote his name over and over revealed obsession. The entry hinted at a mistake, a tragedy, something buried so deep no one could ever find it. My stomach churned. All this time I thought I knew the worst of her, that she betrayed my father, hoarded money, mocked the people who trusted her. But this was different. This was fear bleeding through her pen. Whatever Nathaniel Crowe represented, it wasn't an affair. It was a ghost she had tried and failed to keep hidden. The next day, I visited the county library, combing through old newspaper archives. I typed his name into the database, my hands trembling. At first, nothing appeared. Then, a small article from 37 years ago surfaced. My chest tightened as I read. Local man found dead near Riverside. Authorities suspect foul play. No arrests have been made. The photo beside the text showed a young man. His features sharp, his eyes piercing. Nathaniel Crowe. My mother would have been in her 20s at that time. Young, beautiful, manipulative. And suddenly I felt ice in my veins. What if my mother hadn't just broken hearts? What if she had taken lives? The thought was unbearable, yet the evidence was staring at me in grainy black and white print. Nathaniel Crowe wasn't just a secret lover. He might have been her victim. I copied the article and carried it home, my hands clammy with dread. That night, I returned to the diaries, combing through them like a detective piecing together a case. There were vague references to the river, to blood that won't wash away, to a silence no one must ever break. My throat tightened as I realized the truth. My mother had written her own confession, spread across decades of pages, coded but undeniable. The betrayal I thought I had uncovered, the affairs, the money, the cruelty, was just the surface. The core of her rot was darker. She hadn't just destroyed my father emotionally. She might have destroyed Nathaniel Crowe physically. And now, his ghost had become my burden to bear. When I visited her at the nursing home the following evening, I carried the article folded in my purse. She was sitting at her window, her shoulders hunched, her eyes distant. I dropped the clipping on her lap without a word. She looked down, and for the first time since I began my revenge, her face went completely pale. She didn't try to hide it, didn't lash out. Instead, her lips trembled, her eyes filling with something I had never seen before. Fear. "Where did you find this?" she whispered. My voice was steady, though my heart thundered. "The world already knows who you are. But this could make them see you as a monster." She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. It was the first time I had ever seen my mother cry. And somehow, that terrified me more than her anger ever did. Her silence confirmed my worst fears. She never said the words, but her tears were louder than any confession. I pressed her, demanding details, but she only shook her head, whispering, "You don't understand, Celine. You never will." Rage and horror twisted inside me. "Understand? You murdered him, didn't you? All these years you let me believe you were just cruel. But you're evil, Mom. Evil." She flinched, her frail hands trembling, but she didn't deny it. That was enough. I stormed out, my mind a whirlwind. Revenge had been simple when it was about betrayal and lies. Now it was about something bigger, something that could swallow me whole if I wasn't careful. I thought I wanted her destroyed, but now I wondered if exposing her meant dragging myself into a darkness I wasn't ready for. Sleep abandoned me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Nathaniel's face from that newspaper photo, young and full of promise, now reduced to a tragic headline. I wondered who he had been, what dreams he carried before my mother cut them short. Did he have a family waiting for him? Did someone still mourn his absence? I felt a guilt I hadn't expected. My revenge had uncovered something I couldn't control. This wasn't just about our family anymore. This was about justice left undone for decades. And I was the only one holding the key to the truth. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on me, heavier than anything I had felt before. For the first time, I wondered if revenge had gone too far, or not far enough. The next day, I contacted the county police anonymously. My voice trembled as I told them I had information about a cold case. I sent them photocopies of the diary pages, highlighting her references to the river, the blood, the silence. Part of me wanted them to storm into that nursing home and drag her away in handcuffs. Another part of me quaked at the thought of being tied to her crime, of the scandal erupting in my name. But I couldn't stop now. Nathaniel's story deserved closure, even if it destroyed me too. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My mother's words echoed in my mind. "You're more like me than you think." The question gnawed at me. Was exposing her about justice, or was it just another form of her cruelty living through me? When I visited her again, I noticed the shift immediately. 2 detectives were sitting with the administrator, their eyes sharp, their questions quiet but firm. My mother saw me enter and glared with an intensity that pierced me to the bone. For a moment, I thought she might leap from her chair and claw at me. Instead, she smiled, a bitter, twisted smile. "So this is how you end me," she said softly, almost with pride. "Not with whispers, not with money, but with death." Her words chilled me because in them, she almost sounded victorious, as if dragging me into this secret gave her power over me once more. I didn't answer. I stood in the doorway, my hands clenched, my chest heavy. The detectives would soon take over, and when they did, there would be no turning back. My revenge had become something far greater, far darker than I ever imagined. As I left the nursing home, the autumn wind whipped against my face, sharp and cold. The leaves crunched beneath my feet, each step echoing with the weight of what I had unleashed. I thought I would feel triumphant. Instead, I felt haunted. My father's memory, Nathaniel Crow's unfinished story, my mother's tears, her bitter smile, all of it swirled together like a storm I couldn't control. I had wanted to break her, but in doing so, I had broken something inside myself. Still, there was no going back. The truth was loose now, crawling out from under decades of dust and lies, and it wouldn't be silenced. Not by her. Not by me. The only question that remained was how it would all end, and who would be standing when the dust finally settled. The day the police returned to the nursing home, I sat in my car across the street, watching the building like it held the last of my childhood inside its brick walls. I saw two detectives walk in, their faces stern, their steps steady. My chest tightened as I imagined them confronting her, laying the evidence in front of her, forcing her to face what she had buried for decades. I thought I would feel relief, a weight lifted from my shoulders. Instead, my hands trembled against the steering wheel, and I realized I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to see my mother stripped of her lies, her armor, her control. Because if they exposed her, they also exposed me, the daughter who had carried her blood, her legacy, her shadows. Revenge had been my weapon, but now it felt like a curse I could never lay down. Minutes stretched like hours before they finally escorted her out. My breath caught when I saw her, frail, pale, but her chin lifted with defiance. She didn't resist, didn't cry. She simply looked around, her eyes scanning until they found me through the windshield of my car. And then she smiled. It wasn't the bitter smile from before. This was something colder, something terrifyingly calm. It was the look of a woman who had lost everything, yet still found a way to make me feel small. For a moment, I wanted to drive away, to erase myself from the scene. But my body stayed frozen, my eyes locked on hers. That smile said everything. Even in chains, she believed she had won. The trial that followed was brutal. Reporters filled the courthouse, hungry for the story of a woman accused of a decades-old murder. The name Nathaniel Crowe became a headline again. His ghost dragged into the light for everyone to see. I sat in the back, anonymous, watching my mother shrink under the weight of her past. Witnesses spoke, the diary pages were read aloud, the old article displayed. Piece by piece, her world crumbled. Yet, through it all, she never once looked broken. Her silence was her last defense, and she wielded it like a sword. People saw her as a monster. But I, her daughter, knew the truth. She wasn't just a monster. She was a mirror, reflecting the darker parts of myself I didn't want to face. When the guilty verdict came, the courtroom gasped. Some cheered, others cried. I sat in silence, staring at my hands folded in my lap. My revenge was complete. She would never walk free again. The world finally saw her for who she was, stripped bare of her lies. But instead of triumph, all I felt was emptiness. My father's memory wasn't resurrected by her downfall. Nathaniel Crowe's death wasn't undone. The years of pain and betrayal hadn't disappeared. I realized then that revenge doesn't heal. It only replaces one wound with another. And in that moment, I feared I had become more like her than I ever dared to admit. In the weeks that followed, I wandered through my life like a ghost. Friends asked if I was okay. Colleagues whispered about the big case on the news. But I said nothing. I couldn't tell them that I was haunted by her smile, by the way she had looked at me before being taken away. She wanted me to believe that exposing her made me just as cruel as she was. Some nights, I almost believed her. I would open the diaries again, running my fingers over her frantic handwriting, and wonder if I had trapped myself inside her story instead of breaking free from it. The line between justice and revenge blurred so much that I no longer knew which side I was standing on. One evening, I returned to the attic where it all began. The dusty box sat in the corner, half forgotten, waiting like a predator in the dark. I opened it slowly, the smell of old paper rushing out like a ghost. Inside were the diaries, the letters, the fragments of a life built on lies. My hand hovered over them, but instead of reading, I carried them outside. I built a fire in the backyard and fed the pages to the flames, one by one. The paper curled, the ink turned to ash, and the lies dissolved into smoke that rose into the night sky. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't healing. But it was release. For the first time, I felt a sliver of freedom, as though I had cut the last string tying me to her twisted legacy. The nursing home called weeks later with news. My mother had passed away in custody. A heart attack, sudden and unceremonious. They asked if I wanted to claim her body. I stared at the phone in silence, the weight of the choice pressing down on me. She was my mother, yet she had never been one in the ways that mattered. After a long pause, I told them no. Let her rest in the unmarked grave of her own making. She had carried her secrets into death, but I would not carry her body into my future. Hanging up the phone, I felt both guilt and liberation intertwine inside me. Perhaps that was the only kind of peace I was ever meant to have. In the quiet that followed her death, I started rebuilding my life. I planted a garden in the backyard, where once I had burned her diaries. I found joy in small things, the scent of lavender, the warmth of sunlight, the laughter of a neighbor's child. It wasn't a grand redemption. It wasn't a Hollywood ending, but it was mine. And in those simple moments, I realized that survival itself was a form of victory. My mother had lived her life as a storm, leaving destruction in her path. I chose to live mine as something quieter, softer, stronger. It didn't erase the past, but it gave me hope for a future she could never touch. Still, sometimes at night I hear her voice in my dreams. I see her smile, that haunting curve of her lips, as if she's still whispering that I am her reflection. And maybe, in some ways, I am. But I've learned that reflections don't define us. They remind us of who we refuse to become. My mother's story ended in shame, but mine doesn't have to. Her lies are ashes now, her power gone. All that remains is me, standing in the silence she left behind, determined to write my own story, one that no diary, no secret, no ghost can ever take away. So if you've walked this journey with me, remember this. Revenge may feel like victory, but true freedom comes when you choose to rise above the ashes. Don't let the past chain you to its shadows. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of it in your chest, I invite you to stay with me. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next, because together we can keep telling stories that remind us of the strength buried inside the darkest places.